Hi, this time I want to talk about rulings in tabletop role-playing games, learning complex systems and the pace of an RPG session. This video somewhat connects with a video recently uploaded by SHONNER. I'm going to put a link in the description so that you can check it out because I think he asks about the pace of an RPG session. So before we begin, I want to talk about this channel's sponsor, Heroes and Hardships. This is a universal RPG system, allowing you to play any sort of genre, campaign, story, anything, and you can create any sort of character imaginable. There are hundreds of tools to assist you with that. I'm going to put a few links in the description that will take you to the Kickstarter that should begin in about a month or so. You will also find links to the website, the Tetsubo section, because Tetsubo is a Sengoku era inspired setting that is from Japan for the Heroes and Hardships RPG. I'm also going to put links to my reviews of the Quickstart guide and the Wallace campaign setting based on the life and exploits of William Wallace. So definitely check that out and check out the Discord for more news about Heroes and Hardships. Now let's continue. Okay, let's start with rulings in tabletop RPGs because they are a great source of fun, but also they will get you out of tight spots because not all RPG systems, or rather, there is not a single RPG system that is able to cover any sort of situation that could arise during gameplay. This is one of the advantages of tabletop role-playing games over board games and video games. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy video games and board games. I like to play video games when I like that combination of graphics, music. The story is cool as well, but I play for that specific combination. And gameplay, of course, trying to improve your skills as you take on different challenges in the game. And when it comes to board games, I play them for a certain balance, a competitive balance, when you are trying to defeat the other players or the AI, if it's a solo or co-op game. So that's why I play video games and board games. But when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, they have that advantage that they try to simulate reality within a fictional context. If you were to be too flexible in board games, you would promote a lack of balance and you would ruin the competition, the competitive aspect of the board game, because that way you would be making stuff up as you played along. Maybe you decided that this rule does not longer apply and you want to use this other rule. And even if you set up things beforehand, that is, if you apply some house rules or tweaking, it requires a lot of time for you to achieve the perfect balance. For example, if you play one of those dungeon crawl board games, they are somewhat balanced in the best of cases. They are somewhat balanced so that the side that plays as the adventurers and the side that plays as the game master or dungeon master, in that case, they are almost on equal footing, almost. This is not as easy to sort out or to achieve, but there is that intent. If you start to house rule things, if you start to tweak too many things without taking balance into consideration, one side could feel too powerful when compared to the other one. I think that's a good measure of seeing if a dungeon crawl board game, that is besides from the fun aspect, to see if it's a good board game, there is balance between both sides. And even if you play, perhaps it's a co-op or solo board game, the AI should be a challenge. It should be of adequate difficulty, especially if you have difficulty settings. So you could still house rule things or tweak things and make judgment calls, but you run that risk of the game being too easy, or perhaps in the other way around, maybe you make it too hard. It depends. And in the case of video games, you need things to be programmed into the video game, or program things yourself if you like to, get into the inner workings of a video game. But it's still not that easy. But with tabletop RPGs, I would say it is a given that you will have to apply rulings in your sessions. When I first started to play Dungeons and Dragons many years back, when was it? 1994, more or less. Well, many years back, when I first started to play when I started to learn how to play advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I was still within a video game, a board game mentality, and if it wasn't written in the rulebook, you couldn't do it. So when I first started to play with my players, sometimes they said something like, I'm going to have my character do this, and I said, oh, the rules do not cover that, you can do this instead. And that's not the correct way of handling things. Only by watching others play, when I went on trips to different hobby stores and all of that, I started to see how players actually ran role-playing games correctly. Oh, in case you haven't seen it or noticed it, I have created a playlist with my tips and advice on how to play tabletop role-playing games. I highly recommend that you watch it. The first video, Crouching Gygax Hidden Arneson, I think it's a must-watch in my opinion. So, moving on with the rulings. Rulings allow you to handle those situations that were not covered by the RPG system, and they also get you out of a pinch, of an issue, when you can't remember a certain rule. But because of that, it is important to handle rulings fairly and if possible in the player's favor. Otherwise, the players may think that you are making stuff up to mess around with their characters. So let's say that a player wants to get to the top of a tower and he is a spellcaster, and he comes up with this crazy idea of using this force-based attack spell. He has some sort of spell that emits, let's say, like an explosion or a globe of force or something, and he decides to use the blast from that spell to propel himself upwards into the tower. Maybe if it's not too much of like a tall tower, maybe he could attempt that, but that is not covered in the rulebook. So the player is like, I'm going to cast Globe of Force or something downwards. And you perhaps allow him to make like a saving throw or an ability check to see if he manages to propel himself with the force. Maybe it's a spell that has more to do with a sort of like a psychic push or a telekinesis effect. So it's not, it doesn't damage you directly, but rather it pushes you against something. So he uses that to try to propel himself up the tower. You could allow that, but there is a small chance that he may injure himself, or there is a chance that the attempt will fail. So that is not covered in the rulebook. Perhaps you should still allow it, make that roll. Or if you think something is an automatic success, give it to the player. If not, give him that chance to see if he accomplishes that. Or if it's just too ridiculous, for example, maybe he says he's going to shoot a fireball downwards, he's going to get incinerated, so that makes no sense. But in the case of a force telekinesis effect, maybe there is some way of him pushing himself. Maybe you require a strength check, because you're basically using your arms to propel yourself from the force of the force or telekinetic blast upwards into the tower. So that's what rulings have to do with speeding up gameplay, but also handling those situations that are not covered in the rulebook. Sometimes those situations are actually covered in certain rules, especially those very complex systems, like, well, not in all cases, but there are some guidelines when it comes to Hackmaster. In some cases, in not all of them, when it comes to Pathfinder First Edition, in different feats and spells, you have extensive descriptions of what you can do with that spell or a feat. In those cases, that's great, but if you haven't memorized or written down those effects, that's why you need to organize your character sheet or make your notes if you're a game master or dungeon master. It's important to take all of those things into consideration. But let's say that the player that wrote that on his character sheet, oops, he messed up and it's not written there, or maybe you didn't take that into account in some way. instead of wasting too much time looking for the exact rule, you can handle it via a ruling. I don't think it's too much of a problem if you know where it is and you just grab the rulebook and you read a bit like 5 seconds, and then you tell the player, okay, you need to roll this. But like I said, in other cases, when you are going to waste too much time looking for the rule, or if you think that the system does not cover that, you need to handle it via rulings in order to support the pace of the game. Let's talk about the pace of an RPG session. It is an exchange. The game master presents the world to the players. He serves as a way for the players to experience the adventure. He's going to tell them what they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they taste if they eat something, or if they touch something, if it's cold or hot or hard or soft. And that's how you carry out correctly the aspect of roleplay. Remember, watch my video of Crouching Gygax's Hidden Arneson. Asking questions is going to take you to a very clumsy non-roleplay experience. So instead of asking the game master, what does my character know? Do it, be a roleplay. I want to touch the statue, or I approach the door and I place my ear against the surface. And that way you are telling the game master that you want to hear if there is some sound on the other side. Or when you are touching something, if it feels hot, cold, maybe you get a sort of strange vibration. The only thing that the game master shouldn't communicate, unless there is some other special effect, are feelings and emotions. So let's say that the characters are moving through a cave and they find a tombstone, a grave. And the game master shouldn't say something like, you feel scared or you feel sad. No, if the game master is telling you that, he's either not a very skilled game master, or there is a strange effect causing that emotion within you. Maybe that tombstone is emanating this sort of ghostly or accursed or psionic effect that produces feelings of sadness, of anger or guilt or anything like that. So you shouldn't communicate, as a game master, shouldn't communicate those sorts of emotions or feelings. The players and the personas of the player characters will figure that out. Okay, going back to rulings. Because they speed up gameplay in that way, I would consider them necessary in all RPG sessions. That is not that you have to use them all the time, but they are a very useful tool. Those judgment calls when the system doesn't cover something or you can't remember the exact rule. However, there is a reason why some players prefer old school rules light games or simpler games. There are also some new school rules light systems. But in all of those cases, that's because if you tweak or modify or make a judgment call or a ruling, it doesn't mess up the rest of the system because it's not a complex, interconnected set of mechanics. Because, for example, maybe you are playing, I've given this example in another video, you're playing, let's say, Pathfinder 1st edition, and a player comes up with a very cool idea for a special attack or the use of a skill or something, and the game master allows that, but it turns out that you need a feat to accomplish that. So the player that took the feat of whirlwind attack or cleave or power attack or something, that player may feel cheated, or improved power attack, all of that. He or she may feel cheated because you are allowing the other player to use something that he's basically using it for free. He didn't get that feat when he leveled up. So I think in those cases, you need to apply very minor things, very minor bonuses and advantages, depending on the description of the player. So if a player is doing something that is basically one of those special maneuvers like whirlwind attack or something, make sure that your ruling and your judgment call presents a lesser effect when compared to the feat. Maybe you have some power or edge or feat, depending on any other system, that gives you a bonus. Make sure that the bonus is minor when the other player carries that out, or just in case maybe you deal one extra hit point of damage when the attack allowed 5 hit points and such, so that the other players do not feel cheated. This also applies, for example, in Savage Worlds with all of those edges. They are there to facilitate different things that the players would normally wouldn't be able to do. But because this is a role-playing game and you're trying to simulate reality in a fictional environment, you want to be fair and still allow for the creativity or the good ideas of the player. So when the player comes up with those apparently crazy ideas, allow them, but make sure that the bonus given does not mess up the rest of the game. And that's the reason why some people do not like complex systems, because anything that they handle via rulings or judgment calls could mess up the rest of the system unless you have learned the system well. Now let's talk about complex games, systems, and the pace of the session, the pacing. Whenever you roleplay and you have those systems where you have very specific names for different feats, edges, abilities, powers, you can always name the sort of feature that you are using after your description or narration. So you could say something like, I don't know, you could play, maybe you're playing a sci-fi game and you have this sort of feat that is called hit and run, that allows you to move, take a few shots, and then move behind cover. You could say something like, I start running and shooting at my enemy, and I want to quickly dive behind that wall. And then you say the name. Maybe it's called, like I said, hit and run or shoot and run. So I'm going to run, shoot at my enemy, and hide behind that wall. I'm using hit and run. So the game master now indicates what you need to roll, or usually you already know what you need to roll, but it's always a good idea for the game master to indicate beforehand so that you do not make some rolls that are not taken into account. That will be a waste of time. That way the game master could tell you, make your attack roll, or if you require an ability check, make an attack roll and an ability check. You could roll both dice at the same time to save some time. And so it's all about that. You should also take into account that complex systems offer all of those features to help you with handling any situation that could arise in a realistic way, but also in an enjoyable, strategic, and tactical way. Now let's talk about learning complex systems. Maybe you want to play a very complex role-playing game like Hackmaster, Pathfinder 1st Edition. There are some very, I understand, very crunchy, like you need a high IQ to play them. Some systems out there, like, I understand that Traveler 5 is very complex, overly complex perhaps. I'm very curious about that. Well, let's say that you want to learn one of those complex systems. I recommend that you first create your character as a game master or dungeon master, because you are usually presenting the game to others. I recommend that you create the character, go to the character creation section. Do not feel intimidated by the huge 200, 300 page rulebook. Remember that you won't need all of that, at least not in all sessions. You usually need like 30% or less of the entire book to run a proper session. You learn how to create your character, and then while you are creating your character, start to think of the situations that could arise. When you have finished creating your character, you could use the included adventure module. Many rulebooks include an adventure. Or you could create an adventure yourself. Maybe use a Game Master emulator for solo play. Use the TriCube Tales emulator. That's the free emulator, and it's perfect to get started with solo RPGs. So you could use that to create an adventure as you go along. And every time your character encounters something related to combat, to skill checks, to social situations, then you look into the rulebook how you handle those situations. And remember, you are playing this by yourself, not with your group. You are preparing to run the game with your group. So that way, oh, I don't know how to handle skill checks. You go to the rulebook, oh, that's how you handle skill checks. Oh, I don't know how combat works out. Well, let's say that I encounter a few killer cyborgs, and now you're on that combat encounter. You start to learn about the attacks, the movement, the different maneuvers, tactics. Later on, if you encounter a situation related to psionics or spells, you again look at the rulebook when in the section where they describe psionics, magic, and such. And that's how you start to learn a complex system. Now, you do not need to include everything. I have mentioned in another video that complex games can be handled as modular experiences. Don't try to use everything at the same time. Some complex role-playing games have like little squares or tips telling you only use these rules after you are familiar with the attack roll and the defense roll and things like that. So if you think that something is difficult to handle, then eliminate it from the first session. That way you can make those rolls that you are comfortable with, telling the players how their characters interact with the world. If the characters say something like, well, the players, I want to talk to this non-player character. Okay, please tell us where are the blueprints. So, oh, that's a persuasion roll, and you make the roll. Maybe if the character is a bit more persuasive, like we can reward you if you tell us where the blueprints are. You give that character a bonus in his roll. And anything else that you don't remember, handle it via rulings and judgment calls. After the session, you can review the rules, go through the entire rulebook and see if you want to handle things as the book explains. There are many players out there that play complex systems and they do not use all of the rules, only those that they feel comfortable with or that they feel are better for the pace that they want to handle in a game. Back to pacing. I think this is a personal choice, but if you are not feeling that excitement or interest, or the game isn't feeling fun, then there is something wrong with the pace, in my opinion. So it's all about that. If you enjoy those, like I said, very crunchy tactical experiences, like I'm moving behind these barrels, I am aiming my rifle and taking a shot, and you make your rolls and you start 3 successes, and the game master, okay, you inflict this number of wounds on the enemy stumbles back, or maybe you handle it without informing about the wounds. You can just say the enemy stumbles backwards, but you see this green liquid flowing out of the wound. So creepy. What's that? What kind of being is that enemy? Very strange. Maybe it's an alien or a monster or something. And so when it comes to learning complex systems, you can also use rulings to assist you with learning those systems. And back to pacing, rulings also assist with that. They immediately cut short any sort of lag or stuttering during the session. If someone feels like the game is having too many like stops, it's because rulings are not being applied and everybody's taking either too much time looking at the rules, or perhaps they are wasting time asking too many questions. Like, you shouldn't ask questions like I said, can my character, does my character? No, handle it via roleplay. Just do it. If every time you ask something like, can my character, you are displaying fear, weakness, you are showing that you are a bit perhaps too shy. Maybe you are high and that's why you don't do it. Maybe you're a bit too shy. Maybe you have a big ego, or you are a bit arrogant, that you don't want to appear like a fool, or that you are failing at something. That's okay. If you, instead of saying, can my character look for information in the computer, just say something like I approach the monitor and I input this code, and if nothing happens, that's okay. That happens in life too. Sometimes we make mistakes. That adds realism to the RPG experience. So roleplay. I encourage you to roleplay. If there is a rule that you do not know how it works, handle it via rulings, or if you know the section, oh, I know where it is, just look it up in less than 5 seconds or a few seconds. You can apply the rule as it is presented in the system. So I hope this video presented some useful tips or advice. I am not here to tell you how to play role-playing games. I am telling you how I play role-playing games and what I consider to be the correct way of playing role-playing games. You can watch this video, and if it's useful, use it, apply it. If it's not, don't use it. I would still love to hear your comments and thoughts on this situation. Do you use rulings? Do you handle many rulings during your sessions? Do you prefer simple or complex systems? Do you have trouble learning complex systems, or maybe it's very easy for you to learn such systems and you have other tips or advice? Definitely write those down in the comment section or make a video response or whatever. And when it comes to the pace, how do you handle your own pace? You know, the typical, in my just to solidify things, I think it's a good pace is the game master presenting the situation, the players roleplay, they carry out their actions and interactions, and the game master tells them what happens or if a check is required, and so forth. It's an exchange. And remember, if there are some mechanics, some crunchy aspects, you can integrate those into roleplay. I scream with fury as I cut with my sword in a vertical way. Power attack. You already said the name of the thing that you are using, power attack. Or I'm running in the middle of those 3 enemies. While I cut and slash and thrust, I am using multi-attack. And that's a way of handling things via roleplay while still indicating the... showing the mechanical nuances or particulars of that tactic, action, etc. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for your comments and your likes. If you have questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel, that have been going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description. You can send an Amazon gift card or a drive-thru RPG gift certificate. So once again, thank you, and see you later.